Space combat is a staple of Star Wars, and in both the films and the expanded universe, we've seen numerous battles between the naval forces of various galactic factions. From the imposing Imperial Navy to the ragtag Rebel fleet, we've seen all sorts of navies take the field, but which of the major Star Wars navies was the best? In our not so humble opinion, that honor goes to the CIS Navy. The CIS Navy was not only very well equipped, but its commanders also had a better grasp of naval tactics than those of the other major factions, and in this video, we'll be explaining why.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Confederate Navy didn't start out as the best naval force the galaxy had ever seen. To be honest, for the first few months of the Clone Wars, it was an absolute Sith fest. It was hastily assembled after the Battle of Geonosis from a half-dozen private fleets, all of which had different rank structures, orders of battle, and theatres of operation. These private fleets were supported by hundreds of local planetary security forces, which were a mixed bag and mostly focused on defending their own sectors. At the start of the Clone Wars, the various components of the Confederate Navy just kept operating as they had before the war, maintaining their different structures and only rarely coordinating on objectives. Then, General Grievous came along. 6 months into the Clone Wars, Grievous was made the Supreme Commander of the CIS, and the first thing he set about doing was cleaning up the mess that was the Confederate Navy. He consolidated all of the private fleets under a single rank structure, command hierarchy, and order of battle loosely based on the trade defense forces, and under his direction, the Confederate Navy finally began acting as a unified force. It became far more than that though. Grievous's leadership and tactical genius turned the CIS Navy from a mess into a powerhouse, a terrifying threat to loyalist worlds across the galaxy. For the rest of the Clone Wars, CIS naval forces were divided between local Separatist PSFs, which kept their own sectors safe, and the Confederate Navy proper, which was mostly committed to offense. Occasionally, the Navy proper showed up to defend important Separatist strongholds, but it spent most of its time harassing the Republic, both with conventional campaigns and with more spontaneous lightning raids and privateering. In this manner, the Confederate Navy successfully kept Republic forces off balance until the Outer Rim sieges. Under Grievous, the tactics of the Confederate Navy became highly opportunistic. Separatist fleets would strike out randomly, pressing the offensive with near suicidal determination if their commanders thought victory was possible, and retreating within short order if resistance was higher than expected. A lot of the time, Separatist naval tactics were extremely blunted and relied on numbers, but that worked perfectly fine most of the time, since the CIS Navy had roughly 4 times as many ships as the Republic Navy. Grievous and his underlings made the most of that advantage, and it was only the Republic's superior industrial capacity that allowed the Confederate Navy to be defeated in the end. There were 2 main factors that made the CIS Navy the best, the first of which was its diversity. Due to its origins as a bunch of separate private fleets, the Confederate Navy was made up of a wide variety of ship types, from the high-powered, low-durability Munificent-class star frigate and Recusant-class light destroyer, to the larger and more resilient Providence-class carrier/destroyer and Lucrehulk-class battleship. This alone makes it a step above the Republic and Imperial navies. It speaks to General Grievous's tactical genius that he took the CIS Navy's biggest weakness, its disjointed fleet structure, and transformed it into the CIS Navy's biggest strength. He mixed and matched assets from various Separatist naval forces masterfully, pairing small flotillas of lighter, more fragile warships with 1 or 2 of the larger battleships. Grievous played to the strengths of each warship class the Separatists had on hand, and brought in other ships to compensate for their weaknesses, creating an extremely versatile navy that put the Republics to shame. Compare the diverse, versatile navy of the CIS with its Republic counterpart. The Republic Navy's answer to everything was Venator-class star destroyers or the occasional Acclamator-class assault ship, with the rare support ship or 2 thrown in for siths and giggles. As we've discussed in the past, this was a garbage approach, not least because the Venator was a carrier, not a battleship, and it had major vulnerabilities that made it ill-suited to the frontline role the Republic often used it in. the Empire was little better, for the most part. Although a few Imperial officers, most notably Grand Admiral Thrawn, did have a better grasp on the value of asset diversity. The career officers of the Republic and later the Imperial Navy looked down on the Confederate Navy as an amateur, mismatched attempt at mimicry by a bunch of alien rabble-rousers. But in truth, the Separatists' naval tactics were far more sophisticated than the Republic and Empire's endless Star Destroyer span. For all their history and time-honored traditions, both navies seemingly couldn't grasp this fundamental principle of warfare. Neither the Republic nor the Empire gets the excuse of limited resources either. Apart from being the most powerful governments in the galaxy, there were numerous ship classes in use by local forces during the Clone Wars and in subsequent decades that they could have used. Additionally, the CIS Navy had better ships than the Republic, the Empire, and the Rebels, with only a few exceptions. Even the Separatists' cheaper, mass-produced classes, like the Munificent and the Recusant, had good shields and plenty of firepower with better turbo laser and point defense coverage than the Venator-class Star Destroyer. The Separatists' better ships, like the Lucrehulk, had nigh impregnable shields, hundreds of turbo lasers, swarms of Vulture droids, and comprehensive point defense networks the Republic couldn't match. But the Confederate Navy wasn't just better in terms of composition, its tactics were above average too. We talked about the Separatists' naval tactics briefly earlier, but to really understand what the CIS Navy was trying to do, we need to talk about the Stateless Strategy. The Stateless Strategy was a dilemma that every major, established galactic government had to contend with, from the Republic to the Empire to the New Republic. The root of the problem was simple. The galaxy was really big. It was so big that it was completely impossible to patrol and secure it all, especially since space travel in Star Wars depended on hyperspace, which required predefined routes to properly navigate. This meant it was always possible for a fleet to hide, lick its wounds, and strike back against the galactic government so long as said fleet didn't have any territory to defend. A stateless fleet, one with no territory or permanent supply lines to defend, could strike at the galactic government with impunity, coming out of nowhere and then retreating back to some random patch of space to hide over and over again. The embattled galactic power was then stuck with a dilemma. It could defend its own territory, staving off the random attacks whenever they appeared while allowing the enemy to grow stronger out in the unknown, or it could attempt to hunt down and crush the enemy fleet, leaving its own territory vulnerable to attack. By leaving the defense of the Confederacy to Separatist PSFs, the CIS Navy was able to commit to the Stateless Strategy, constantly harassing the Republic on 100 fronts at once from unmapped staging grounds known only to the Trade Federation or IGBC. Thanks to Darth Sidious, the CIS was restrained enough that the Republic was eventually able to militarize and outgrow this dilemma, becoming able to simultaneously defend most of its territory while also prosecuting the Outer Rim sieges at the end of the war, destroying the CIS Navy's supply chains. With that said, the Republic never fully escaped the problem. As the Battle of Coruscant showed, the Separatists were still able to exploit the Stateless Strategy during the Outer Rim sieges too. The CIS wasn't the only major Star Wars faction to pull off the Stateless Strategy. The Rebel fleet used it against the Galactic Empire to great effect, and to an extent, the Empire ended up using it against the New Republic under Grand Admiral Thrawn. But those factions were only able to pull it off in a handful of theaters at a time. The Confederacy achieved it on a galactic scale. The Confederate Navy was everywhere during the Clone Wars, and on several occasions, it struck deep into Republic space, even into the core worlds themselves. This had the added tactical value of being an effective psychological weapon against loyalists the galaxy over, who all knew that they were never truly safe from the long arm of General Grievous. For the record, if we had to pick a runner-up, it would be the Rebel fleet, which also understood asset diversity but had fewer assets available. But what do you think? How would you rank the major navies of the Star Wars universe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.